You know, it's interesting, when I was writing my blog Monday, I was talking about, the Orlando shooting last Sunday morning. And, I remember coming to church last week, and, before church I saw, 20 people were killed. And then when we came out of church last Sunday, the number was up over 50. And just reading the accounts, it sort of dominated the rest of all last week Sunday. And when I wrote my blog on Monday, I basically dealt with this, and I said I'm going to talk about it and then this issue on Sunday's sermon. The hard thing is I usually never choose my sermon topic and then find a Bible verse to fit in with about it, but in this case, the 3-year cycle, I look back 3 years ago, and the 5th Sunday after Pentecost, we had this gospel reading about the 4 types of soil. And it fit in very well, is really what I said, starting and thinking about through that. And it's Jesus telling a parable. And I can imagine Jesus, most of the time he spent his ministry out in the countryside. Sometimes he'd get in boats and people would go. Other times he'd be on mountainsides and thousands of people would be gathered in front of him. And I bet on this occasion, in fact, he tells this parable in both the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He's sitting on the mountainside with the people milling around and preaching, and off you can see on the mountainside somewhere in the distance, you can see somebody scattering seed, planting a field, getting it ready. And he talks about people's reception of the good news of the gospel. And he compares it to 4 types of ground. Hard-packed, rocky, weedy, thorny, or good soil. And as I thought about this and dealing with this whole topic of Islam and Muslims and dealing and relating with them, and I've many times I've grown and talked to Muslims in many ways, and how do you communicate with them? And sometimes that's one of the most difficult situations I've encountered of sharing the gospel with somebody, with Muslims, more than anybody else. I would have to say they are probably what I would call hard-packed ground. It takes a lot. There's a sense of a resistance going on, and it is very hard. And how you do it. And sometimes, and in fact, I'm dealing with this issue. One of the books our book club read, earlier in the year we read a book by a Muslim who became a Christian, Searching for Allah and Finding Jesus. It was a very good book if you want to learn a lot about the issues that I'm dealing with and just going and doing that. And a lot of when I think of last Sunday night, it's this issue, and we're dealing with it more and more again and again in the world. It goes on around us. And we have these types of shooting, and 9/11 really was the first time it became widespread. We had California last fall, and France, and Belgium, and all these situations keep happening again and again. And a lot of it has to do with a certain aspect of Islam that's very radical, terroristic. And you know what? There's the foment for it's going to keep going on, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon. But you want to start engaging this. Do you know what? I don't talk military solutions. I'm not a general, and I don't pretend to be one. You leave that the military aspects to generals in the military and doing all of that. The one thing, though, that we do as the church, as we do dialogue with everybody, and is especially dialoguing with Muslims, we share Jesus. Do you know that's the one thing? It's one of the highlights of my ministry back about 25 years ago. I led a tour of the 7 cities of Revelation, and we were going all throughout Turkey to these 7 cities, and I was doing Bible studies at each of the cities. And on the tour bus, we had a Muslim guide, a very bright guy. And he and I, when we went to the different cities crossing the country, he and I would sit together and we'd talk theology a lot of times. And you know what the biggest problem he had with Christianity was? And most Muslims, and this is what they're taught right from the beginning, that we're not monotheists. We don't believe in one God. We worship three gods. And I said, no, that's not. We do worship one God, but it's God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. But it is one God. And especially in this book, and the one thing I found is the first line of dialogue when you deal with somebody who's a Muslim, and it takes a lot of time. You know what I challenge them to do? Compare Jesus with Muhammad. Compare Jesus with Muhammad. It's a big difference between the two. Do you know what? And even in the Quran, Jesus is acknowledged to be sinless, performing miracles, born of a virgin. They say he didn't die on a cross. They couldn't imagine a prophet of God dying on a cross. But they hold Jesus in a fair amount of high repute. But when you look at Muhammad, and he lived, late 400s, early 500s. He had 12 wives. He married one wife when she was 6 years old. They say he waited to have sex with her until she was 9. But when you think about that, you start thinking about that, and then you start comparing Muhammad and everything Muhammad said, and challenge him to read the Quran and compare it to Jesus. There are certain things in the Quran that are very peaceable and like them, and it's more or less from the early period of Muhammad and of what he was doing when he didn't have any power. But the problem with Muhammad, once he seized a little bit of power, and do you know what he got? Every time they robbed a caravan in the Middle East, he got 20% of the profits. Can you imagine Jesus saying, well, I get 20% of the profits in this piracy raid, in this situation? It sounds ludicrous, doesn't it? When you read and hear Jesus speak, you hear forgiveness. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. You hear Jesus walking up to a Samaritan woman at the well who's been through marriages time and time again, but saying, you know what? You want water right now, but I can give you water that's going to spring up in your belly for eternal life. Regardless of issues, backgrounds, problems, Jesus reached into situations and embraced and forgave people. He challenged them to leave their sin behind, but he brought forgiveness. Anytime you think and picture Jesus, you hear peace. And a lot of times when you see statues of Muhammad anywhere around the world in the Middle East, he's usually on a horse with a spear in his hand, a sword in his hand. That's an incredible contrast. That's the first line of reasoning when I start talking with Muslims about it. And you know what? The interesting thing is, that's one of the biggest contrasts, that book, Searching for Allah and Finding Jesus. He was befriended in college by a Christian, this young Muslim man. Both brilliant students, and this Christian hung out with him, made him his best friend. And this is one of the lines of reasoning that he challenged him to and said, you know what? Well, let's compare each other's faiths. Let's compare Jesus with Muhammad. And who wins that comparison every time? Jesus does. The second thing is really when you think about it, and it's a big problem in some of all these terroristic activities, is sort of this radical nature. In Christianity, the heart of our faith is we're saved by the grace of Jesus on the cross. The whole book of Galatians, which we've been going through, all the epistle readings, we've been running through the book of Galatians. This is, I think, the 4th week in a row on the book of Galatians. Paul is talking again and again how we can't do enough by the law to get right with God. It happens 100% by the grace of Jesus on the cross. Our faith is based on that incredible grace. We're made right with God. Do you know, Islam, you've got a lot of obligations. And a lot of things are noble. You know, I like the praying 5 times a day. Praying, I like praying 10 times a day. But they have obligations of doing this, obligations. And I think we're in Ramadan now, aren't we? Are we not? I think we're in Ramadan right now. We're supposed to fast till sundown tonight. Chelsea, she went to McDonald's. No, that's not accessible. So, although I think they let kids do. They do let kids break the fast. The kids, 5-year-old kids don't have to do that. But alms-giving, certain things. But in Islam, there's a sense, have you done enough? Do you know what the one passages that really cause a lot of problems in the world is there is a passage that sort of implies, the one way you can be assured you're right with God, dying in the jihad. And do you know what? That's a lot of what the inspiration of all the problems we've had. Why do you want to fly a plane to the World Trade Center? Well, it's a jihad. Why do you shoot 49? Well, it shot over 100 people. 49 of them died last Sunday morning. It's a jihad. Do you know, if you use measurements, Scriptures say all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. The incredible blessing of what Jesus does is he makes us right by one standard, his. He's perfect, and he shares that perfection with us in the grace and the forgiveness of the cross. And that's amazing. Do you know, the third thing I'll talk with Muslims and talk a little bit about is Sharia law. You've probably heard the word on the news bantered about Sharia law, right? And a Sharia law is sort of the customs and afterwards. And, in ISIS, now in Iraq, do you know what the common, if you come out on Facebook that you're gay, do you know what the result of that is? You get thrown off a 7-story building. You get blindfolded and put up on top of the building, and you get thrown off the building. That's the law of the land. That's crazy. And sort of you understand what's going on when you hear this situation, this guy last Sunday morning walking into this nightclub, shooting people, and then see how he's trending on Facebook and on the web. That's the most bizarre thing I've ever heard of. He's shooting people up, and he's got all these people hiding out in flooring. There's all these people bleeding all over the place, and he's looking at how he's trending on the web. How do you do that? And there's a part of him that's saying, you know what? Hey, that's the penalty. And because in ISIS, that's a big part of the debate there. They were having a debate. Do you stone the people? Do you boil them in oil? Homosexuals? Do you do all these other things? And they finally came to, they said, the throwing off the building solution. And he's just going and doing all this. And when you look at that, you say, this is the most bizarre thing you've ever heard. And I could go into other things with Sharia law. And there are certain places in doing that. You know, women, your testimony is only half as good as a man. You know, that's one thing I feel bad, you know, when we left Afghanistan and what's going on with the Taliban there. Do you know what Sharia law, do you know what women account for? Not even real people. You don't educate them. You don't treat them as people. They can't drive. And people exposed a little bit to the West, you compare, you know, our laws with Sharia law. You know, there isn't really much of a comparison. One of the things that makes it a very hard ground is the fact that culture is so resistant to the gospel. And we had a woman from USF, she grew up Muslim, and she became a Christian. She came here to church for the three of the years while she was at USF. This is about 7-8 years ago. And the one thing she told me, she said, Pastor Dave, never mention my name, never tell anybody, because I'm a Christian, but my parents don't know. I'd be disowned. And she said, I have an uncle who might kill me if she found out I became a Christian. She came to church, but she said, never mention my name to anybody. I never wanted getting back to my family that I'm a Christian. And you know, that's a little bit frightening, isn't it? You're coming to church, but you don't want anybody to know you're doing it. But she was brave. Do you know, the one thing, as I said, is how do you deal with this situation? The one thing is the church, you know what? The one thing is the church is I want to embrace Muslims. I want to befriend Muslims. I want to say, you know what? We care. That's our goal. I have a favorite story, and it was in a book by Tony Campolo, and one of his friends is a pastor in Manhattan, and this pastor went to this little diner every morning, a little dive in Manhattan. It was South Manhattan by Wall Street, and there was a little diner with about 8 tables, and there was usually 25, 30 people in there every morning. It was almost the same people, but nobody talked to other people all the time. And then one day this pastor stood up and said, hey, my name's Joe, and I see almost some of you guys 2-3 days a week, and you're in this diner. A lot of them ate their own breakfast there all the time. And he introduced himself, and the whole diner started talking with each other a little bit, because it was the same people going to work, eating in there at 8:30. We started work at 9 o'clock, Monday through Friday, all through the week. But the owner of the diner wouldn't say a word. He had an accent. He said, well, my name's Harry. He wouldn't say anything about himself. But this pastor kept talking to Harry, made friends with him, and said, well, just tell me about yourself. And then finally, after about a month of just, coaxing it out of him, he said, well, my name really is Hazim, and I'm from Baghdad in Iraq. And I said, welcome, you're at the greatest diner. It feels like home for me every morning for breakfast. He ate there about 4 mornings a week. And things were going good, but he remembered the day the war started between, I think it was the first Gulf War, but it started between the U.S. and Iraq. And this pastor went to the diner and said, I want to be there and give him a hug and say, you know what, I don't care what's going on with the fighting. You and I are friends, and we're going to stay friends. He got there, tried to be there right then when the diner opened at 6, but you know what? There were 7 other guys who were regulars at the diner there to do the same thing. And Hazim never felt ostracized. He never felt not loved. That's I think the secret. And this whole thing of Jesus saying, some ground is really hard packed. And you know what? In dealing with Muslims in the church, The one thing is, we got to resemble more of Jesus. And you know what? It changes people. It does. This whole conflict that's going on, when we talk about Jesus, we resemble him. And you know what? We're all about forgiveness. And Jesus looked beyond national and ethnic boundaries and said, you know what? I got something to share with you. And that's really, I think, what the church has to do. I think militarily there are some things that the military has to do, and I think the military should decide that. But personally, we don't want to be known for the freaks we are. And then, when I think about radical Muslims, I don't know, my guess is 10 to 20% of Muslims, which makes it a big number. It's not just a little group, it's a pretty big group. But we've got radical Christians, the West Hillsboro Baptist Church, have you ever heard of them? They're crazy kooks. I mean, they're like, oh man, every time I hear or see them, whatever they do, and I say, those guys, they're idiots. But I think the way we stop a lot of this terror, and part of it's going to have to be, is that I think the Muslims who are sane have to say to the others, this is craziness. This has to be stopped.